All right, go.
All right, good morning. It is Wednesday, August 19th, bright and early this morning. And I think the going into this session, I think we were doing a quick query of fun and interesting prompts for this morning, absent any natural things that have come up over the past week. And I really like the one that Hack actually brought up and spent a little bit of time thinking about it. But the prompt for this morning is, what is compassion slash when did you first feel self-compassion? I think actually the second one was the first leading in question, which I think is a very intriguing one. But as you know, we always like to talk about what the heck the self is. And I think any reflected emotion really starts to reinforce that self. So yeah, let's get right into it. Hack, what was your initial take when we started doing our little exercise?
You want me to take a crack at this one first?
Yeah. I mean, you could also say like, man, that question was hard, or I had to think about this or whatever, right? Like it's just,
man, that question was hard. Shit, this one's tough. Let me drink more coffee real quick. I think this one's a pretty broad topic, and I don't know if we'll be able to explain it, or if I'll be able to do it any justice. Maybe I can just start talking around it. I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I think you can't have compassion for other people until you find a way to have self-compassion. Like you can't have true compassion for others until you find a way to have compassion for yourself. And I think you won't know what that means until you actually have true self-compassion for yourself. But I do think there's going to be an inflection point in people's lives when, like, before the moment they had self-compassion, and then after the moment, and then I think they'll understand that statement that you can't have true compassion for others until you have self-compassion for yourself. The reason I think that is because when you have compassion for yourself, when you have compassion for others, it's almost as if you understand what they're going through. You understand, how they got to that point in their life, why they're the way they are, why they reacted the way they did, good or bad, it doesn't matter. You're kind of like, look, man, like I understand how you got there, and I got your back. Like I truly have your back. I'm here for you. I know how you got here. It doesn't matter how you got here, but I got your back, and you fully understand the situation that they're in. And I think that's kind of like a general definition for having compassion for someone else. And the reason that I say that you can't have true compassion for someone else until you find a way to have self-compassion is because you can only know how someone got to the point that they got to in their life for you to understand why they were there. But for yourself, you've been in your shoes 24/7, every second of your life. So you actually truly know how you got to the point where you are at this moment. So let's say you get to a certain point in your life and I don't know, shit's not going well. So you're like super hard on yourself and you hate yourself or whatever. You know how you got to this point. You saw yourself, as a child, like growing up, you saw yourself, make all these decisions as a teenager. You saw yourself going through trauma. You saw yourself going through all this bullshit. You saw your personality form. You saw yourself get all the way to the point into your 30s. And then you saw yourself, make these decisions based on your life up to this point. And then now you're in a situation where you hate yourself and you don't have any compassion. Now, you saw how you got here because you were always in your shoes. And if you can't find a way to be like, look, man, I totally understand, Hack, like you got here because A, B, C, and D, and actually feel like, hey, listen, like I have compassion for myself, then how are you gonna feel that compassion for someone else or truly feel that compassion for someone else? Because you weren't actually in their shoes ever at any point in their life and maybe you're just inferring how they got to that point. Yeah, so I guess that's a strong statement out of the gate. You can't feel compassion for others unless you can feel it for yourself first.
It definitely is, and I think it's a great start. But I think that excuse me, based on what you put out there, I think I stand at a fork. And the one fork is one that I think is well tread, at least in my discussions and in our discussions, which is almost everything is taken to its maximum through self-inquiry, like know thyself, probably the most famous words in all that's kickstarted all of philosophy, right? But I think I want to take the provocative route, try to deconstruct it, because that's what we do here. But first of all, I think through the course of our discussion, and I think the struggling through it live, that's a part of the art that we're doing here. And I certainly am struggling through this topic, which is like, what is the nuance difference between like empathy, sympathy, compassion, altruism, right? I feel like there's just like so many overlapping Venn diagrams there. But my question to you would be that self-compassion, could someone who is bad have self-compassion in a way that is not true? Is there a truth element to compassion? You know, people who are quote unquote bad operators in the world, do in some way, do they excuse themselves by having actually a good dose of self-compassion, which enables them to do whatever it is that they do?
That's a good question. All right. I do have an answer. I'm trying to think if it's going to get me canceled or anything like that. My short answer is you're asking if bad people can have self-compassion, or
not if. I think they can, but how would we describe the nature of those two things together, right? I think compassion almost always has a angelic pure glow around it. I mean, it's one of the best words I think that we have in English, untainted. But yeah, what if we jammed it up right next against like immorality?
I think it has a strong potential to make immoral people moral. I think when you have true self-compassion for yourself and you saw how you got here, you can even start having compassion for people like that you would never even consider having compassion for. So imagine if, like, I don't know, if I had compassion, like if I had true self-compassion for myself and I saw how I got here, and I realized the human condition, the mechanism of the mind, the way that all the traumas I went through, and how I got to this point, and I was like, man, fuck, like, can't believe I've been so hard on myself, because I realized now that this bullshit that happened to me when I was like 10 made it so I made the decision when I was 22, and now I'm in a spot at 36. So rather than being mad at myself at 36, I should be compassionate to myself at 10. Like, that little 10-year-old boy didn't know what the fuck was going on, and that shit happened to him. And now I'm here making this decision and putting myself in the spot. And so when I realized that about myself, it makes it so much harder for me to look at someone that's doing something that I view as wrong, to be like, yo, is that dude's fault? I mean, it probably is his fault on some level, if you're looking at it in a vacuum, but he's probably not making that decision as an adult. Some shit probably happened to him when he was like, 8 or something. I mean, I don't know what happened to him, but maybe like, maybe his dad like left his family when he was 8, and he had to like come up with his entire worldview at 8 because he had to grow up faster. And now at like 30, he's making these dumbass decisions, and you know, maybe I'm even the result of those, you know, I'm the one that's getting the short end of the stick, because this dude is creating, you know, making a decision that is, let's say, immoral because of a worldview he came up with when he was 8, and you know, I'm getting shitted on because of it. But if I understand, hey man, like where that decision came from has nothing to do with me, I think it allows me to at least, you know what I mean, like feel bad for this dude and kind of be like, I mean, this is essentially like, it's like somewhat of an 8-year-old child in an adult body, because he wasn't able to develop past that point in some regards. So I guess my answer is, I think that bad people, if they have true self-compassion, become less bad. Was that the question that you asked, man? Sorry, I just started talking.
No, that was basically I mean, the question was open-ended. It was like, what is your take on it? Because I'm trying to turn it on its head. And I was wondering if like self-compassion, I mean, it depends on how strict a narrow of a definition that you make it, because I think that I would agree with you that it would probably make the most sense to use compassion to mean something that's like deeper, like a deeper root understanding of suffering and the trend line of a human story. But I think that on the same spectrum, like self-compassion not taken to the same degree of depth and understanding can be like self-excusing behavior, right? Like justifying like your worldview, you know, I'm like that because like the world beat me down, and that's the way it is, right? Like, you know, people who are like red pillars or incels, like there was probably a moment where they were tired of being, well, not incel, let's say red pillar, right? The like redemption, but in a negative way, right? In a misguided way. Like there's a time where they got tired of getting shitted on, and there had to be some self-compassion. And by the way, like full disclosure, I am not by any measure a red pillar, but there was a time where I was extremely intrigued by that community and that thinking. So I like deep dove into the stuff that they would produce and write about. And so for everyone, catch up, red pill community is basically this community of mostly men, even though there are some like women in it that believe that it very much in traditional like gender roles, right? That men have to take charge, you know, have authority, and that women not only need to, but want to and desire to be like controlled in a way, right? And that's like masculine and feminine and all that stuff. And that like, and the thing is that they've attached themselves to this extremely big, mega capitalist train that we know as self-improvement. Just one of the biggest like industries that's ever existed is like self-improvement. And so it's very interesting to see where those lines are. But anyway, I digress. That's what I was curious about, like how it might kind of be like sponsoring more quote unquote like bad behaviors with self-compassion, or yeah, by having self-compassion. And I think it's not black and white at all by any measure. Anytime you start to talk about, like start to qualify what's good and bad. And I'm gonna close this out by jumping back to a metaphor that I realize that through the source of this podcast, I'm probably going to keep going back to over and over and over, and it might even be worth like a topic in itself, which is back to the topic of dog training. we're both dog owners, and I think that any dog owner who's like kind of peeked under the covers of like dog psychology, you start to develop a crazy appreciation for what is a wild animal, domesticated, and like has enough intelligence, moldable intelligence, and personality, if you will, but it's still an animal, right? And I think about how there was, I don't know if people listening to this remember, a while back, there was this dog trainer who was extremely popular. Cesar Millan had his own show, would go on a show and like fix people's dogs. And like, I was very enamored by this guy. Like, he seemed like a dog whisperer. And then the controversy slowly came out that like his methods, while they can achieve results, and again, there's a Venn diagram of outcomes, right, where you can still get the same results, but the way that you got there, and the way that he did it was still subjugating the dog. Like he would subtly like kick the dog in its organs with his heel, or like this whole alpha pack mentality where like dogs need like an alpha and they need to be pressed down upon. But the guy presented as extremely compassionate, family man. Like, he was pretty tender with the dogs. He was stern, but then after that, you started to see like, oh, there was like this different underlying mentality versus like this entire other set of dog trainers who weren't as popular, didn't have a TV show, probably still got deeper results with their dog training, but they did a completely opposite model, right? Like, their model was like not authoritarian, not physical, didn't cause the dog to like have this like inborn fear. Like, arguably the dogs in the other set, they didn't, they weren't afraid in the same way. And so Cesar Millan's dogs, while well behaved and performed, they still had a threat of anxiety, whereas those other dogs didn't. So anyway, long diatribe, but yeah, I think a lot about how some good intentions can go bad. Self-compassion, arguably an extremely good intention, how might that go bad? And maybe this took the conversation in a completely different spot, but anyway.
Well, first of all, I liked how you combined the red pill community. You use that word almost synonymously with incels. You were like red pills and incels. Yeah, so that was kind of funny. Yeah, I think red pills are, it's a whole nother discussion in itself. But I mean, I could have some compassion for some of those dudes too, probably. I mean, but Cesar Millan definitely beat the shit out of a bunch of those dogs until they obeyed.
So it's funny because I think one of our podcasts, which number was it? It was, I can't remember. It was one of the early ones. The title was Uncomfortable Laughs. I feel like going into this podcast, I felt like it was going to be uncomfortable laugh territory the whole way.
Maybe compassion has to be like self-compassion and compassion for others has to be coupled with awareness for it to be like effective. Like when you're talking about like compassion in the sense that, hey, like, what if somebody's just using compassion as an excuse for them to be like, oh yeah, obviously I'm the way I am, so I'm just gonna keep doing the shit that I do, even if it's a bad thing. I feel like a lot of times that's, maybe you can call that compassion, but it's rooted in unawareness. It's rooted in like, yo, I'm not really aware of why I'm the way I am, but I'm gonna have compassion for myself anyways. Versus, like I don't know, let's say you have total awareness how you came out the way you did and all that stuff, and you're able to see like, yo, and see yourself as like a child, like entering like this life of, and then you're innocent, all this shit's going on, like, not like you have your mom and dad, everything's good, and all of a sudden, boom, 7 years old, some shit went down, and you still have memories of this shit because it was such a vivid experience in your life. And now you realize that at 7 years old, this shit happened to you. And that incident caused you to like shifted your worldview so much that it resulted in an action later, and you're able to go back and feel as a feel for that 7-year-old child. Obviously, no adult in your life was able to do that before, which is why you had to form your own worldview. I think perhaps maybe the formula isn't just compassion, but it's compassion plus like a high level of awareness as well. Because I do think a lot of like these communities you're talking about, like let's say Red Pill, for instance, I think a lot of that's rooted in unawareness. A lot of that is kind of like, hey, like, I mean, it's much easier for me to remain unaware and be like, well, all these women are bad people, rather than, well, I'm an incel. You know what I mean? Like you want to think about like, and I don't know if that's what they believe, but it seems general enough to me, you know.
Yeah. So I by no means am I refuting what you're saying. Again, I just adjacent, right?
Right.
Bring it closer to home though. I find that, and again, I'm taking us another direction again. I do find that our generation, as first generation immigrants, and the social positions that we take tend to be at odds with the ones that our parents took, which is actually really relevant right now, actually, with the Afghan crisis. But our parents were war refugees coming from an entirely different, Asiatic culture. And I wonder what compassion means, like to my mom, for example, who shows love in a completely different way. And that, like, to some degree, the way she's doing things is an extension of what she sees as compassionate, right? In the world that she came from, growing up, one of 10 kids in Vietnam, lost her dad at 11. And it's not that she doesn't have compassion or self-compassion, but it doesn't really quite map to, I think, my own at times growing up, which is how I also I kind of came to that conclusion through a self-exploration of self-compassion, right? Being like, oh, hey, just remember, like, you didn't have an American mom like all your other friends, like, don't worry about it. It's like so I think I just think that what's tough is that sometimes we hope, to your point about awareness, that like even when you add that measure onto it, which I think is a really accurate one, like even when you turn that dial up, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone lands in the same spot, just because like programming can be really strong. And now you could argue maybe like you turn that dial up enough, we do access like a collective humanity. Like you take a Buddhist and a Stoic and a, whatever, all those philosophies that have really done like deep awareness, like have a deep awareness training built into them. Maybe that's where we need to be, but I think that spectrum is so much more of like the breakthrough is maybe further out. So, and I don't know, this is pure speculation, of course.
Yeah, I think the breakthrough will definitely have to be like further out. I don't know if I feel like I've crossed that line at a certain point, but I don't know if I ever would have crossed that line for myself without being on some like heavy psychedelics. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's like I don't know if I ever would have gotten there, just going through my day-to-day life, just because the programming is so strong. Like the programming is always there. You're never at a certain point where it, that turns off. It's not designed to turn off, and it's there to
keep you alive.
Yeah, it's there to keep you alive. Yeah, it's there. You have to have this worldview, this story, this narrative that's automatic, that's that's kind of like on at all times. It's
Yeah.
it's layered on top of everything that you ever experienced, and it's meant to be that way because it's beneficial for your survival. But when you can see this thing that gets layered on top of everything, and this layer has been created, you know, day after day, experience after experience, for as long as you've been alive, you know, ever since your mind could have done something like that. I mean, that's probably why you know how like human babies, I mean, obviously humans are the most dominant creature in the world, yet for the first like 18 years of their life or some shit, they're like completely useless or something like, I don't know what the actual, probably not 18 years, hopefully not, but at least when they're like babies, they're fucking useless until, I don't know how long, until a child becomes not useless with themselves. But it's because I think humans, like, you know, have these big minds, and the thing that gives us our, I guess, like an edge, the thing, like, you know, the way that birds can fly, humans can, I guess, like create mental models of reality that allow us to operate in complex, like social situations and groups and societies and things like that. But it takes a while for us to download those mental maps, and that's what like the younger years are for, until we're not useless anymore. I don't know when we cross that line, but imagine if you're downloading those maps and you're like fucking 5 years old, and some shit goes down, and you know, you get fucked up because, I don't know, someone was unaware of how humans work, and they just treat a 5-year-old the way that a way that they shouldn't, and now you have a fucked up map that you're downloading.
This is a meaty topic for sure. I don't want you to throw away that 18-year-old number too fast, too quickly, because I think you're not wrong. And I think that that number continues to go out with each iteration of humanity. Like, I think that there's actually substantial literature that, you know, the brain doesn't actually stop developing until 26 in terms of like core identity. And what's funny about that was that 26 was also my year where that happened. And then I read the literature and caught up and realized that this wasn't an insignificant year, like late 20s. I think there's a high degree of confidence when I suggest like scientific literature on that number. Yeah, we don't talk about it, honestly. We really don't talk about it. You know, quarter life crisis, etc. We kind of allude to it here and there, but I do think that that priming period, right, the tutorial mode of in World 1, like you know, will continue to go out further and further as the world increasingly becomes one that is digital, meaning more abstract and conceptual, right? And there's more almost infinite leverages, right, of how you will differentiate yourself into being, and that takes so much time in self-discovery, as you mentioned, right? And I think it's because all the things that we talk about kind of come down to the fact that our software, like the out of the box, like think about this, right? You know, you buy, for example, back when Windows was like the dominant ecosystem, when you buy Windows was interesting because they were a software company and a hardware company in a lot of ways. And so when you bought it, you bought that OS at that point in time, right? Through that cycle, like you got Windows XP, whatever, right? And then depending on where you bought it, and the next time you would get default loaded a new OS. And I think that to keep this analogy going, where our base OS is just not fit or suited for how rapid the environment has changed, right? Our hardware even hasn't changed, right? But the internet that we log into like is completely different now. And to take this on a more personal note, the initial question was, when did you first experience self-compassion? I actually did not experience it until my first mushroom trip. And again, more caveats and disclaimers, by the way, guys, there's a ton of really great research. Tim Ferriss is funding it, really great stuff, Michael Pollan, on psychedelics in like, for therapeutic usage. And I cannot remember a single instance of self-compassion up until I did mushrooms in college. I think I felt plenty of compassion for others and sympathy and all that kind of stuff. And but I could not turn it back to myself until psychedelics was able to break that open. And in a way that allowed me to rewrite my OS. Like, and this is the strange loop phenomenon of people, being that we are both, we write our own programming. Like we can, and I think that's what allowed me to be where I am now, is being able to rewrite it and update it. Otherwise, I think on a different trajectory, I'd be like 50 years old, still not having a single ounce of self-compassion. And to your point, have limited external compassion. I would have hit a ceiling, right?
So I have a couple questions there. And I think there's two. I mean, I'm biased, but I think they're both very good questions. So I don't want to forget either of them, but I just forgot one of them. So let me state the first one and try to remember the second one. First one is, you stated that you had a quality of compassion for people even before you had self-compassion for yourself. And I think that, obviously, that's true. Like, you feel for people, even if you can't find a way to feel for yourself. And I guess that goes against the statement that I opened the podcast with. But I guess my question in that regard is, did the quality of compassion for other people change after you found that true compassion for yourself, if at all? And if it did, how did it change? And if it didn't, then I guess there's no further questions.
That's a great question. And so, yeah, this is really good stuff. And in many ways, this is great because this is kind of like a live therapy between us, which, and I want to, again, expand the word therapy, right? That word needs more good PR behind it, like just talking, illuminating. But I think it certainly changed. I would attribute any type of compassion that I had as a child to, I mean, God, there's so many things, but I would say one of the biggest ones was the fact that I was a voracious reader. Like, I mean, I was one of those kids that just like destroyed books. Like, whenever a class had those reading exercises, like read books, whatever month, like I would just like destroy books, like just go right through them. And I think that this is another topic that we talk about often, which is like the magical power of books, right? Especially for kids. And so, and the stories that I loved the most were ones that were very hero's journey oriented. And so the hero's journey stories are framed by struggle, right? They're always framed by struggle and hardship. Like, and then like being pulled into deeper and deeper and deeper depths, right? And eventually dying, like that's part of the hero's journey circle. Like you have to like build yourself up, and then you actually die. Like you actually hit the actual villain that will kill you. And so I think that and also being a Catholic, right, which is very orthodox in its teachings, so much of my framing around things was around suffering. That was the primary force. And so, but I think that after doing psychedelics, like there was no longer just like a single spectrum, like a single ladder or hierarchy of like you pressing against suffering. It was like exploded out a little bit more in terms of just the different, I guess, maybe not suffering in a capitalist sense, like suffering certainly was still there, but it was more of just a general nature. Like, I guess maybe maybe it's useful to say that like I went from a God model, suffering, and the evil, like, two poles of like God, devil, evil, suffering, to like just universe, nature and man. And that, again, that suffering was us like applying something on top of what is just a superpositioning of man and nature. And actually there was no difference, like in the fact that we actually are just nature itself, right? And that the division of things, the division of things is what causes the suffering, not any type of suffering itself. So I would say, yeah, it definitely changed on that. And it made me, yeah, realize that like, I think labeling is the first like step towards undue suffering of any sort. So
We have to label.
it depends, right?
When you say labeling, what do you mean? Like to me, labeling is like when my nephew is like 3 and he's like trying to figure out what sound equals that object, or what sound equals that person, or what sound equals this person. And so your mind is creating labels, like the mental like the labels there. Is that what you mean when you say like labeling is the first suffering?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the first label you apply on anything is just self, right? I think that's the first label, like me, I. And so, yeah, that starts it for sure. But I think being in a state of awareness, mindfulness and awakening, you are imperturbable, right? I think that's the goal, is that like heck, if you call me lazy, it only hurts insofar as there is a Stephen to even like be called lazy, right? But when you realize that you are this fluctuating system, and that like no labels actually stick in the same sense. Like there are other labels, I mean, even like tall, right? 5'11", like there's, yeah, I think once you start to unload those, then you've removed a lot of suffering, and you've unlocked a lot more compassion. So
We need labels. Like, is labels with awareness different than unaware labeling?
So this is the topic that I had been mulling over for like 3 weeks, right? And I kept hitting you on it. I think we maybe briefly touched on a podcast, which is like the Bodhisattva archetype, right? In Buddhism, where you attain Buddhahood of some sort, awareness, awakening, and you go back into the thick of it, right? In that degree, yes, like you need to be able to put on the mask again, the clothes, you know what I mean? You need to be able to do that. And so I think that you need labels in that sense. And to some degree, you need to be able to play out the game, play out the label game, right? But I think that there is mastery achieved by people where they can be in full awareness even as they're like wielding labels. And so, and I would argue that, I've gone back and forth in this, so by no means is this like a cemented position. But I think that those people have transcended like needing labels. Like they can still you know, do the things that humans need to do to make food, create shelter. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's still work to be done. Like, you know, there's still good work. There's still work to be done. I don't think you necessarily need labels to do that. And now I don't know though, I will say, if like, this is also because we have the benefit of spending a significant amount of time in the world of labels. And so you're not wrong, I don't think, that like, for example, if you zoom all the way back to kids, kids definitely needed labels, right? But maybe what's the right, if we as a society had full control over our development, what is the age in which, if we could embed a switch, a natural switch where like awakening happens, maybe that happens at like 18, for example, right? And I think that from 18 on, maybe you don't need labels enough anymore. Like you know about money, you know about like you have enough. You had enough like basically here's another way to put it, right? Like you have enough Lego pieces, and you know how to build enough things with those Lego pieces, and you know how they fit together, and you don't need now to keep making crazier Lego pieces getting lost in the sauce when it comes to like the world of, you know, more intricate, crazy, like specialized Lego pieces. When, you know, we go back to how like there's so the depth of chess off of just like a simple board, the depth of like our base set of labels should be enough for us to do what we need to do.
When you say labels, I mean, to be clear, we're talking about like language, basically, like being aware that this sound equals that object, and the complexity that can get to, obviously, like the sound now equals the story of myself, some shit that I unconsciously play out in life. Correct?
Yeah, I would say so. Like for, you know, Alan Watts always goes to like the sound of a stream that's the stream. That's the like the gurgle, blah, 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 whatever.
Mhm.
We call it a stream. Like what's a stream? Like,
Right.
you know, it doesn't tell you anything about it other than what but when you look at it, if you hear the sound of a stream, it tells you it's water. It tells you about its movement. It tells you about like the ferocity. It's, you know what I mean? And so I think and it's funny because I use labels to like describe all of that, but yeah, just more direct experience, right? Like more direct experience, and like and you can take it so many ways, because linguistics is something that, for example, a field that if I could retire tomorrow, I would probably just spend the rest of my life studying linguistics and trying to be smart about it so I can actually talk about it. But I think about often that conversation about civilizations that have so many ways of saying the word happy versus civilizations that only have like 5 ways of saying happy, right? What have we incurred? Like, what are the pros and cons of either model? Like, I think that we are on the upper end of the spectrum in terms of like qualifying the ridiculous amounts of happy that a human can experience. But then maybe you just need 5 types of happy or 3 types of happy. You know, so I basically mean language. Yes, yeah.
So we need labeling because we need language. But is there a difference between aware labeling and unaware labeling? Like, you know, like, okay, so like if I'm unaware of labeling, then I take the word for the thing more than the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
in the case of the stream, you know, like you say the word stream, and since I've already internalized what a stream is, through my understanding of stream from when I learned the word, all the way up to this point in my life, when you say the word stream, sometimes that just gets automated, where I'm like, oh yeah, stream, it's just fucking water, like a small river or some shit, but bigger than a creek. So in my head, I'm just like, all right, stream, that's the thing. But let's say I'm Alan Watts and I'm aware, hey, listen, we need to communicate using these labels, but the label is not the thing in itself. And when you say stream, perhaps it produces a more richer experience because he has more awareness of the label. So is it appropriate to differentiate between labeling before you become aware of what a label is, and obviously, like, I think once you become, I guess, closer to awakening, that's like when you start like, wait, what the fuck, that sound equals that object, but it's not the fucking object. The mental map is a map, but it's not like the thing in itself.
The map is not the territory.
Yeah, the sign.
Money is like, not wealth.
Yeah, and yeah, all of that. So like, but we still need labeling. You can't eliminate it, but perhaps, I don't know, maybe aware labeling and unaware labeling. I mean,
yeah. No, I like the way that you framed it. I think, yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think it's tough because, like, for me, though, labeling is almost all, like, when you say we need it, I feel like it almost automatically presupposes we need it in order to, like, do work, right? For us to collaborate and do things together, like do work, right? Or win a game.
To do anything. To function as society. Or to exist in groups.
Right, on a mega scale, but
even on a like, even me and you talking right now, we didn't have labels, we couldn't talk.
Right. So let's see how I can unpack this. Like, let's see. So here, like, so thoughts, right? Thoughts are like an input. Like, it's just it's like a data source. It's just a stream that just keeps coming in. Like, those thoughts and those labels come in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for us in our usage of labels, yeah, I guess I think I would have to meditate on that more. I think that at this point in our conversation, you're right. Like, of course, we need labels to refer to things, and to talk to each other, collaborate, like, but I don't know. There's something I think I'm chasing there. There's a white rabbit that keeps, like, getting just out of reach on this. We'll find him. We'll find him.
You keep trying to catch that rabbit. I do at this point think that we need labels, but I do differentiate between using labels in an unaware manner versus being aware of what an actual label is. Understanding that it's the sign pointing to the object, but it's not the object in itself. Me using the word hack to point to this thing is not hack in itself. So if someone says, hey, hack, you're lazy and you suck, it's like they're not doing anything to this physical being of me. It's just another sign that they're pointing at my sign that says, it's like, my sign says hack, and they pointed at a fucking sign at it that says hack sucks. And I'm just like, all right, well,
yeah,
nice sign, buddy. Like, it doesn't affect this if I understand that it's just a sign, but it's not this thing. You know what I'm saying?
Right. It's funny because I'm thinking of, like, Yeah, even we need labels to like talk to our dogs. Like we need to like teach our dogs labels.
I think the human animal is special because we can carry complex labels. Like there, I mean, we create invisible world, like invisible. I mean, we've spoken about this many times, but the human animal is complex because we can create invisible worlds in our heads and share that with other people, and then believe things that don't actually exist in the real world, like creating the idea around religion and then sharing that with, like, you know, millions of people, and everyone understands the same idea about religion, even though nothing in this, like, you know, it's an idea.
Can't, yeah,
You can't
hold it.
touch
It's not
it,
tangible.
but
It's not tangible.
but it really does affect how millions of people act in their day-to-day lives and identify with this thing, and it affects your actions. And then now you have, you know, entire, you know, countries worth of people just sharing this idea and making it stronger and bringing it to life. And, you know, religion is just one thing. You do that with nations, you do that with you do that all the way down to any size groups of people. But I think humans as thing that gives, I mean, obviously humans aren't physically dominating over many species, like, you know, on this earth. And even I think when like, you know, Homo sapiens, like our species of humans took over, I think Neanderthals or whatever species of humans that we killed off, you know, in order to take over, they were way more physically dominant than like the current species of humans. I'm definitely not an expert on this, so I'm probably just talking out of my ass, but I think that to be true on a general level. But the thing that gives, like, you know, these hairless apes, you know, Homo sapiens, the edge over, let's say, like Neanderthals that are probably like 10 times stronger than us or some shit, is the fact that we can hold more complex ideas in our heads and probably band together much bigger tribes of people across vast amounts of land. And maybe a Neanderthal group is closer to like a monkey, where they have like a bunch of like little, you know, 24 people tribes, but they can't like expand beyond that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because, and that's why I was struggling with the word need, as you said it, because like I mean there's monasteries, right, where they're not using labels. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why would I need a label, right? Heck, if you were upset, right, I would only need a label because we were not in a state of reality where your upsetness shows, or you know what I mean? Or it's because there's like persona masks and masks, right? So we rely on you telling me like, hey, you did this thing or this thing happened. I'm upset, right? Versus like, if we like, I mean, I'm just gonna it's an extreme example, right? But let's just imagine where you and I become monks for a little bit, silent monasteries even. Of course there's labels happening, but there's also like the ability to still survive, be, right, while taking reality in more directly. And so need is interesting because need kind of presupposes or begs the question, like, what's the ultimate end goal? And I do think that, like, if you take like the conventional evolutionary measure, where the high score of any organism is, you know, how many you can make and how long it's probably actually time, I would say, probably more than volume, or they're both very close to each other, right? And like, arguably we're not winning that one. Like, you know, dinosaurs have been around for hundreds of millions of years. We've only been here for a fraction. There's animals that, like, I would say ants are probably actually maybe winning right now over us. Like, you know, I think it's just that we frame things so much on like, on subjugation or we frame it in our model, which is why we say like, oh, humans have this benefit of like verbal cognition, and that's what makes us distinct. But there's not really anything that makes us distinct, I would say, other than our ability to maybe extrude higher levels of order of matter, right? Like we can make, like when you just look at the world from a strictly material, like periodic table, like everything in the universe is contained in the periodic table that we know of, right, of elements, and that we can like synthetically make new ones, or like this one occurs in trace amounts in the universe, but we can like make more of that. So in the sense that like we can move matter through higher orders, is something that I think is to our, like maybe like makes us unique, but I don't know if, I mean, and definitely yes, and cognition makes us unique, but why do, but need in what sense? Like need so that we can just like colonize planets and become as big as possible, like need
as in we can't function in modern day society the same way without it. Need as in like we can't do any of the higher order stuff without it. Like for instance, one thing that labels allows us to do is to pass knowledge beyond this lifetime. Like it's kind of like me and you started this life already on level like, like 1,000, not on level 1, not like trying to discover fire, because we probably never would have discovered it if we started on level 0. You know what I mean? Like the fact that we have a periodic table of elements, like you need to be able to like label things with words and then share those words with other people to like, collaborate on these huge projects. And then when it comes time for you to retire and die off, you need to be able to like write this in a fucking book so that, when your children are of age, they can read this book and be like, oh shit, periodic table of elements, something that it took your entire lifetime to figure out. But now, you like going back to the magic of books, you can like digest this in like a much shorter period of time and then build on top of that. So when you write your book at the end of your life, you pass on this wisdom to someone else. And that's the labeling I'm talking about, like the mechanism of being able to use language to a very complex degree. And obviously I know it's not just like books and stuff like that, but we can't function in society without being able to talk, and you can't talk without labels. But I do think there's a differentiator between being aware that you're using labels and being completely unaware that you're using labels. And I think for many things, there's a differentiator. For instance, like the example you gave earlier, maybe we're out, enjoying nature, and the word stream, and you're like, oh yeah, stream, I've seen 1,000 of those, like, and it gets automated away. You don't even fucking notice it, even though this stream is completely different than the other one. And obviously no two streams are alike, and there's so many different nuances, the weather, that all that stuff that you're automating out because of the label, like that's unaware labeling. But if I'm like, hey, Steven, look at the stream, but let's say you're like a monk or Alan Watts, you're probably not just gonna look at the stream and be like, oh yeah, just another one of those streams, you know what I mean? So I think there's a difference in unaware labeling, and then that's not just like with experiencing like things in the world, it's just like unaware of the label of yourself. That's a big one, that's a huge one. That's a lot of people unaware of the label of themselves, and that's like how you get like really fucked up sometimes. And then once you become aware of it, I don't know if it makes it any better, but I think that awareness does help over time. And there's so many other things that there's labels on that. I think the ability to label, the ability to language is like a foundational, like it's like birds have an edge because they can fly. Humans have an edge because they can carry complex ideas in their heads. And I think the foundational building blocks of all that, it's language, and language is labeling, and labeling is necessary for humans to function in society the way that we have been. But maybe we don't need to function in society, like that. I mean, that's a existential question that is beyond the scope of this podcast, I think.
Or
no,
this episode, I agree. I totally agree. I think that I think that you're absolutely right, and I kind of went around in circles there. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the problem, what I was kind of struggling with was, and I think there's an implicit assumption here that I didn't like maybe surface earlier on, which is I feel like we're talking about two extremes, right? Which is like the inner self, the us, the label, whatever. But then also like, and I say this with caveats, like 'cause I don't want to fall into the trap of labeling, but the modern society that we live in is like the dials are all turned like crazy in all different directions. And I think that uh, I would predict that an Alan Watts or some like very enlightened guru would say, like, oh, that's nature. Like it's whatever is manifests, right? We still act within it, but like, when you watch like a vine take over a tree or whatever, that's just, oh, it's just the vine doing its thing. So yeah, it is humans doing its thing, but it's a pretty ridiculous overgrowth right now.
Mhm.
And so how we, it's hard not to have, it's hard not to have a response to that.
Correct.
Like, it's really hard to not to talk about things like this and not have a response to that. So
Yeah, we should I feel like that's a good seed question for another episode, because I know we are coming up on time. But I mean, but you're right. I mean, talking about like labeling 30 years ago, before the digital age, was a completely different ball game. Now there's just like, I mean, a different ball game, as in like we're not even playing the same game anymore. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but I don't have one right now. But I mean, I think once you like, imagine if like you're seeing 100x more labels, and any label that you want to see to confirm whatever you need to, like it's just not the same. It's just not the same game that humans are playing. And the thing is, even before when we were unaware of our labels, it fucked us up, even in a society where the information age wasn't happening the same degree. Even in high school, people would have anxiety just based on the small group of friends that they have. And maybe this person might like this person, or the person you like doesn't like you back, and you're just like, oh fuck, like my world's ending. Now imagine you still have that, like the high school thing, but now you have everything attached digitally. You can get multitudes. Like it's just not the same. It's just not the same game we're playing, and I don't want to pretend to be able to deconstruct the game of what we're playing now, and how it's different than the game that people used to be playing. But I do think it's something that we should put thought around, because I can't imagine growing up in a society like today, being on a, and obviously I think I have more awareness today than I did 18 years ago. And I would not be able to imagine myself 18 years ago with that level of awareness that I had, and then just coming up in the digital age, and just Facebook, Instagram, like TikTok, anything you want, like you can find. And any label that gets placed on you digitally sticks with you forever. Maybe not forever, but it probably does stick with you for a lot longer, because it's it's gonna be there. So I don't know, that was kind of a ramble, didn't really get anywhere, but yeah, man, it's just labels times 100.
yeah, no, couldn't agree more. I guess I think, yeah. I think that's just the struggle. It's so, like, even using the labels we have, like I struggle to like accurately depict where we are now. It seems like, right? Like it just seems so overwhelmingly indescribable. The sheer magnitude and explosion of people and information labels. I think I came across this little factoid earlier. I didn't really. It was like, I think it was a New York Times article or something. It's like, I think Americans on average are like consuming like 35 gigs of data a day, like just based on what passes through our eyeballs and into our ears. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like, where does that all go?
It is kind of,
so much information.
That is kind of interesting. We need to talk about this in a future podcast. I do think this is coming back to the theme of so what. I know today we talked a lot around labels and stuff like that, and I think there was some practical information in there. But I think this might even be more practical to talk about, but also very interesting and relating to the previous couple of podcasts where we talked about what is awakening, and I guess this one was started as self-compassion, but then I think we spent the latter half talking about labels. It would be very practical to apply how labels have changed over the course of just our lives. How there was labels still existed obviously when I was 18, but labels exist in a completely different way now when I'm 36. And I think some people don't even realize that to some degree. And obviously everyone kind of realizes it, I think at least a little bit. But like, how much is 35 gigabytes of data? Like, what does that even look like?
Yeah.
What does that even look like?
I think all of Wikipedia is like 8 gigs, by the way.
Okay, so what does that even fucking look like compared to how many gigabytes of data we were consuming like before that? And I don't know, I feel like these questions need to be explored, and maybe on a future podcast we should do that, because I do not think this is like a 5-minute topic.
Yeah. You know what? I totally agree. And, I just want to throw this out there. This feels like actually a really good, like, Tim Urban Wait But Why blog post, where he shows you like, quantifying. Yeah. I mean, if not, then like we might be able to play with that idea. But yeah, like, what if you quantified the data, like data download in a procedural sense, which we often don't do.
How do you even quantify like data before there was computers? Because I mean, now we're quantifying it based on gigabytes, but obviously a lot of it's like images or videos or whatever, right? But like before there were computers, obviously I'm still awake in my body for every second of the day and stuff like that, and stuff is still getting inputted, but it's just not in a digital format. So like the amount of gigabytes, like it's not like I'm not consuming something.
Yeah.
It's I mean, gigabytes.
I think, it starts oral traditions, right? So I would say, like, in small tribes, the amount of time we spend storytelling or listening to lectures or just socializing, right? Talking, like gossiping with each other. I think that that's probably the first means of data download. And then obviously things got written down. So that's the next form. I think it's probably just the evolution of like communication mediums.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and the vehicles that hold those mediums. So, but I mean, the other thing too is, like, back in the old days, we would also just stare at the freaking stars, right? Like, and create entire mythologies just by looking at the stars. So, I mean, that was another one. But I think it's whatever we kind of like. Yeah, I don't know. We'll leave it at that. That was great. That's also another great one. So I want to make this. I'm just going to say this because in many ways, this podcast is also a meta experiment about like you and I talking, right? So I wanted to make it into the transcript that that this one was probably more like divergent than we've had. I think, and it'll be interesting to see how that pattern continues to go as we have more and more of these great conversations with uncomfortable laughter.
Yeah, let's possibly use the question that we just kind of touched on as a seed for the next episode, because I do think that will be more convergent
Sounds good.
into something. And I guess the
Yeah.
question, and I don't know if this will be the final question. This is not a question. Labels in the digital age. How do we define where we are now with the magnitude of information labels that we consume on a day-to-day life? That's not a question. I'll think of a better question.
Sounds good, man. Good talk.
All right, I'm gonna stop this recording.